Hi! In this lecture, you will learn how to create disabled triggers. First, let me explain what the disabled mean again. As I explained in the previous lecture, a trigger can have two main status first, valid or invalid. If a trigger is invalid, it's a problem because it will prevent the DML operations on your table or view. So it will prevent the users to do their jobs. Invalid triggers must be validated as soon as possible. The second status of a trigger is valid trigger. Valid means there is nothing bad about the structure of that trigger. It can work without an error. But there are two more statuses of the triggers: enabled and disabled. If a trigger is enabled, that means it is in action. It works now. But if it is disabled, that means it does not work. But this does not prevent the user's job because users can do the DML operations even if the triggers are disabled. It has no effect on the tables. So sometimes we need to disable a trigger for some reasons like copying the tables or checking some data changes or making huge data loads faster because triggers will slow it down since they will also do some business, or if an object that the trigger references are not available, etc. It depends on your needs. But you will need to do that somehow in your business. So why we need to create a trigger as disabled then? Now, here is the actual difference. If a trigger is disabled, it will not prevent the DML of the users even if the trigger is invalid. And because of that, you may need to create some disabled triggers to compile without any problems. Because if you create a trigger and if it is invalid, it will prevent the DMLs. But if you create it as disabled, it will not prevent even if it is created as invalid. So you can confidently work on your triggers without any fear. Then you can validate it when you are done with it. Or sometimes you may have your own reasons to create a trigger as disabled. So, starting with the 11G release, Oracle lets us creating disabled triggers. So how do we do that? It is very easy. We simply write disabled into the create code of the trigger. Now, we generally use this while we are creating a new trigger, but since we write create or replace in our trigger, it is the same as creating a new trigger for this issue. I used an existing trigger to save some time. Great. First, let's be sure that our trigger is enabled, because we will see that it is recreated as disabled. Let's refresh. As you can see, our trigger is disabled. So let's click here and click on enable. Now let's write our disabled text and compile. Disabled. As you can see, it is so simple. So let's compile it. Now, let's check from here. Let's refresh our triggers. As you can see, it is created as disabled. If we wouldn't write the disabled keyword, it would be enabled automatically since we compiled it. Because we know that if we can compile successfully, it is enabled automatically by the server. Now, let me show you something. Let's close that trigger and open up from the connections area again. Did you see that? Our disable command has gone. It is created as disabled, but the disabled command is not written on its create codes. Be aware of that. Otherwise, it will be disabled at all the compilations. So disable command is for a single use. It is deleted as soon as you compile it. Actually, it is not deleted from the create code, but it is deleted from the codes of the actual trigger. You understood what I mean, I think. Great. As we can write disabled for a trigger, we can also write enabled too. Let's write it. And compile it. And refresh from here. As you can see, it is created as enabled. But since it will be created as enabled by default, you don't need to write that. It was just to show you. Alright, in this lecture, you have learned why and how to create a trigger as initially disabled. So this is the end of this lecture. See you in the next lectures.